Hey there, I'm Joe Weems. Before we get into the video, I want to remind you about ng-conf 2023 happening in Salt Lake City, Utah on June 14th and 15th. Head over to ng-conf.org to check out the speakers, check out the talks, and to get your ticket before they all sell out. We'll see you there.
Hello, it's good to be here. So I guess you have very likely heard about Micro Frontends. It's about subdividing a huge application into tiny applications. So in theory, it is quite easy. In theory, in practice, as we will see, there are some challenges. The thing is, you do this in order to assign different teams to those applications. Different teams that can work in an autarkic way. They can do their own decisions in order of technology, but also in terms of their architecture. Or to put it in another way, all of this brings back the agility of small teams, even though you have a huge overall software system. That means first and foremost, micro frontends are about scaling teams. And as a good friend told me, teams is plural. That means you have to have more than one, otherwise you just have a team, and if you just have one team, that this might be an overkill for you. Because it's not that much about technical stuff, it's really more about scaling your whole process. However, there is a little tiny challenge. This guy here is your little tiny challenge, your customer. The thing is, your customer is not interested into micro frontends. No, not at all. Everything they want to have is one software system that does exactly what they need. They are not interested into starting 50 applications each and every morning. And so somehow you need to find a way to integrate all your micro frontends into one big thingy. I call it the shell that is loading all the different moving parts. But the thing is, you need to do this at runtime. You need to do runtime integration. Because when we talk about micro frontends, we talk about several frontends that are developed but also deployed individually. So you only know them at runtime, and so you can only integrate them at runtime. And runtime integration is hard. We are doing it for years, perhaps even for decades, but it is hard. In former years, we didn't even have a good solution for it. Some people, for instance, used iframes. I don't want to speak it out loud, but yeah, some people used it, and it might work in some situations, you know. The good message is, since about 2 years, we have a rock-solid solution for this, namely module federation. Module federation ships with Webpack, and so it ships with the Angular CLI. And it allows you to do something like this here. It allows you to load something from a separately compiled, separately deployed application. You can just grab over there and get a component, an ng module, or perhaps just a function from this other application. Rock solid. Yeah, and this is what I want to talk about today, and I will not only talk about it, I have also prepared some labs. But first of all, I will show you the theory. That means I will talk about static and dynamic federation, I will talk about sharing libs and data, and I will talk about combining different frameworks and framework versions. After that, I have prepared a lab description for you, a hopefully elaborated lab description, we will see. And this allows you to do all those examples in your very own base. And if you have questions, I will be here during you are doing the labs, and so you can ask me, and I'm more than happy to help you. Okay, so before we start, let me also introduce myself. I am Manfred, I'm a trainer and consultant for Angular, and I'm focusing on Angular in the enterprise environment. I'm quite connected to the Angular community. I live in Austria. I do a lot of stuff in Germany. And I'm always happy if I can work together with people around the globe, which is nowadays quite easy because we are using remote technologies quite heavily for about 2 years, I guess. Okay, let's get started with the first topic I've prepared for you. It's about static and dynamic federation. The thing is, if you start with module federation, you get 2 types of application. 2 types of application. The first type is the shell. Officially, it's called the host. And the second type is the micro frontend. Officially, it's called the remote. And now you can configure both with your Webpack configuration. For instance, you could map a virtual URL to a micro frontend. Here I'm mapping the URL MFE1, stands for Micro Frontend 1, very creative, I know, to this or that micro frontend over there. And over there you can expose files, ECMAScript modules to be more precise. You can expose a module with an Angular component or with an ng module, or if you go with standalone components, you could also just expose a routing configuration pointing to different standalone components. It's really up to you. When exposing files, you are assigning a short alias. Here I am assigning the short alias CMB. Because normally the shell is not interested into my real file names and in my long paths. And when you have done this, something beautiful happens. When you have done this, all you need is just a dynamic import to point over there, to grab something from over there and load it into the middle of your application. The best of this is, your framework, hopefully Angular, does not even recognize that you are loading something from another application. From Angular's perspective, this is just lazy loading. It sees the import and says, okay, lazy loading. But Webpack, underneath the covers, knows what to do. Webpack knows that now it needs to grab it from over there. This is static federation. Static because you need to know the remotes upfront. You need to configure them, as you see here on the left side. If we go more dynamic, then we can throw out this configuration on the left side. Then we don't need to know about the remotes upfront. Instead, we just deliver this piece of information at runtime. Here I'm passing it to a helper function communicating with Webpack at the runtime. And here you see we are also passing the same pieces of information, like a pointer to the URL on the other side or a pointer to the exposed module. This really allows for highly dynamic scenarios. Little tiny detail, you need to get some metadata about your micro frontends. And this metadata is written by Webpack into a file that's called the remote entry. You don't need to do anything, you get it for free. Webpack will generate it for you. You just need to load it somehow into your shell. Here I'm doing it with a static script tag, but you could also go with a dynamic script loader. Somehow those metadata needs to end up in your shell so that the shell knows how to interact with this very remote, with this very micro frontend. And the best of all is, you can share libraries. You can say, well, I'm using Angular here, you are using Angular there, so let's just load it once. Let's just load it once and share it. Because it does not make sense to download Angular 10 times just because you have 10 micro frontends. The thing is, sharing is always an opt-in. Each and every application needs to opt in into sharing. It's like if I ask you if you want to share your desert with me. You need to opt in, and also I need to opt in. Otherwise, sharing your desert with me will not work. If you want to use all of this with the CLI, you don't need to do much, because module federation is already there. The CLI is using Webpack. You just need to switch it on, and for this you need a little tiny plugin. I've written this plugin. You can ng-edit. It also generates a configuration for you. You can adjust the configuration, and then you run your application, and hopefully Bob's your uncle. Let me show you all of this in a demonstration. Here I have the example I will show you in a minute. And here I have the example, abracadabra, I want to show you now. It's a shell. It's a micro frontend shell, and here I have my micro frontend. It's a separately compiled, one more time. Here I have really my shell, and here I have my micro frontend. It's a separately compiled and deployed application. It even runs on a different board. That is not the prerequisite, but the fact that it runs on a different board really shows that we talk about two separately compiled and deployed things. And when I'm clicking here to flights, I'm loading this separately compiled application into the middle of mine. It really works seamlessly, as you see here. Let us have a look into the source code of this. If we look into the source code of this, let's begin with the micro frontend, we see this is just an ordinary Angular application. Nothing special in there. Nothing special, but this Webpack config. It's a very tiny Webpack config with just the key data about module federation. We need to assign a name. We can expose files like an ng module. It could also be a standalone component or a router configuration. It does not matter. And we need to opt into sharing. To make it easier for you, I'm going here with an share all helper. Share all means that all the libraries in your package.json are shared, so you don't need to list them step by step. Yeah, and this is all what it takes to make a micro frontend out of an ordinary Angular application. How cool is that? When we look into the shell, we have quite a similar situation. Here in the shell, we also have a Webpack configuration. I'm going with dynamic federation. That means I don't want to map paths to my micro frontends over there. I've just thrown it out. And I want to share stuff. Remember, sharing is an opt-in. And then all we need is just a routing configuration that is doing lazy loading. You see it here. Load children, we all know this. But instead of going with a dynamic import, I'm using this helper function to point to my micro frontend, to point over there and to load it dynamically with the power of Webpack module federation. And that's all. The result is what you have seen before. You can load one application into the middle of the other application. But it goes further. When we start with something like this, we also need to find a way to share libraries and data. And this is what I want to show you in the next demonstration. So if we look in here, I have an authentication library. And this authentication library knows about the current user. It has a very simple authentication service, which is implementing something I'm calling authentication for very honest people. You see it here? It's really simple. If everyone is an honest person, the life is far simpler, something I found out. And that means one micro frontend or even the shell can lock the user in. And another micro frontend or the shell can read the username using the scatter. And this is what I'm doing here. You see this name Max? This name Max is set by the shell. When we are loading the shell is hard-coded setting the name Max. And here in the micro frontend, I'm reading it. This is something you will also experience in the labs I have prepared for you. And by the way, in this example, I'm sharing a library of my monorepo, of my workspace, but this also works with external libraries installed via NPM. Let's come to the third part I have prepared for you. Let's come to this guy. And no, before you ask, that's not me in college, no. This is the good old Frankenstein. the Frankenstein monster, to be more precise. This guy that was assembled of different parts of different dead people. And this is the metaphor I'm using for a system where we want to combine different frameworks and framework versions. Sometimes you need this, but of course this is nothing you plan for. But if you need it, I got you covered. A little tiny word of caution, workarounds are ahead. We all know this Frankenstein guy is not an easy person. We all know how the story ended on the North Pole. It did not end that well there for all the involved people. And we also need some workarounds to make this possible. The first thing I would do to create a Frankenstein is to wrap my applications into web components. This is not totally necessary, but it's useful. It's useful to abstract the differences of the frameworks away. And after that, we need some wrapper component, some Angular wrapper component the router can point to, the router can activate, and this wrapper component can now load this web component that is using another framework or another framework version into the middle of your application. It loads the web component, and we all know what the web component is doing. It is mounting itself in some HTML tag. That means we also need to add this HTML tag. And then you get the best of both worlds. You can share your library. If someone else needs the same library in the same version, you can share it. But you can also load different versions and different frameworks. If you really, really need it, if you really want to get in touch with this Frankenstein guy. Let me show you an example for this. For this, I'm switching to my other branch. Abracadabra, and here we go. We see that now I can load a React application into the middle of my example. So hopefully it works. Come on. No React application. Let's reload it. Am I connected to the internet? Because no, I'm not connected. So hey, we could play this game with this guy. No worries. AG minus grid exclamation mark. Yeah. Let's reload it. Yeah, here it is. I've loaded my React application. Hey. Thank you. I've loaded the React application into the middle of my Angular application. Here I'm using a different Angular version. Here I'm going with Angular version 12, even though the shell is already using 14. Angular 14. And this version 12 is shared across those different Angular applications here. I just need to load it once, and then I can reuse it. In my point of view, this example shows that we can mix and match different frameworks quite nicely. Plus, I think it also shows that we can integrate legacy stuff. So it can be a nice approach to migrate away from an existing stack little by little. We all know technologies come and go, and such an architecture might be your insurance for the mid or long term. If you can slice your application vertically, then this is really a tempting approach for migrating your stuff. And that's it for the theory. So the next part is for you. I've prepared a little tiny lab. Let me click here. Let me show you the website. And here you find all the slides and, as I hope, an elaborated lab description. Feel free to go through it. You will just tinker the application I've shown you. By the way, this website looks like this. Feel free to go through the steps. And if you have any questions, I'm here and I'm more than happy to answer your questions. Okay, so enjoy and PowerPoint and have fun with this lab. Thank you. And of course, I need a picture for my grandma. She's so proud. Our boy is going to America, you know. Our boy. Okay, the counter is going down here. The time is almost over. So thanks for joining me with this workshop. And if you have any further questions, I'm here in the venue. I will take some lunch out there in some minutes. So just reach out to me and let's have a talk. By the way, there is also this free ebook you can download with more information on this. And here you find my contact data. You find my material on my website. And if you want, follow me on Twitter to keep contact. So thanks for having me.